By now, you're well aware of what's going on all around Ukraine right now. And if you aren't aware of the huge military force that Russia has assembled along Ukraine's borders and the many threats of invasions, then you live a wonderful, peaceful life, and do not let me disrupt your peace. But if you are familiar with what's going on, then you've no doubt seen the hundreds of articles about the most recent denial of service attack that has hit the Ukrainian government, as long as several Ukrainian banks. Well, on February 15th, the Ukrainian government was hit by a denial of service attack. That also impacted a number of banks based in Ukraine. It hit those sites and lasted for several hours, preventing a lot of users from obviously being able to connect and perform tasks. This also included a fake SMS campaign where customers of the banks that were being impacted were sent an SMS message saying that ATM service was being disrupted. Although those banks and the Ukrainian government would later come out and say that those texts were fraudulent and that must have been part of the campaign itself. So if you're watching this and you're part of the cybersecurity crowd, then you're probably thinking, well, denial of service, no big deal, right? After all, since it appears to just be a denial of service attack, that means no malware was detonated, no data was lost. So what's the big deal? Well, yes and no, it wasn't a big deal. Yes, denial of service attacks are not inherently a big deal. And for those of you that aren't in the cybersecurity crowd and maybe you're learning what a denial of service attack is, basically think of it as like death by 1,000 pokes. You're basically denying somebody access to a specific service, but it doesn't actually destroy the service. It doesn't exfiltrate data. It doesn't detonate any malware. It's literally, it's basically preventing you from, in this case, connecting to your Ukrainian bank account, if you have one, for only the amount of time that the bank actually hasn't reacted to the attack or that the attacker decides to stop. It is not the same as a more traditional data breach that we would actually see as a significant event, because there are no commands being run by the attacker on the target system. There's no malware being detonated. Really, it's not that big of a deal. What is a big deal is that you hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm. So I guess DOS that like button. But since no malware is being detonated that we're aware of and no data is being exfiltrated that we're aware of in this attack, then all good, right? Well, not really. And we kind of talked about this a little bit with the website defacement, where similar to the website defacement, this is a pretty low level cyber attack. Nothing's being detonated like we've already said. It's just preventing access to a particular service for a very limited amount of time. However, given the political context around Ukraine, anything like this, even the low level attacks, it has a higher level of public scrutiny. And obviously that means that something like this will get talked about a lot. And that means that a lot of people that don't know anything about cybersecurity are probably going to think that this is a huge deal and then talk about it as if it were a huge deal. Or worse, people are going to talk about this and actively spread disinformation, which let's actually talk about that for just a moment. Let's talk about the root objective of this attack, as well as some of the other cyber attacks that have happened in Ukraine. Like the website defacement, this cyber attack was pretty high profile in that a lot of eyes were on it. But unlike the website defacement, this really appears to just be the denial of service attack. What makes both of these cases a huge deal is its publicity. Both were designed to stoke some sort of panic or fear. And in this case with Ukraine, the idea is to degrade the public's belief in the ability of the Ukrainian government to provide their security. One distinct difference from the website defacement, however, is that after that happened, one Ukrainian official would later go on to say that that was actually just a distraction for the real attack. And that led us to Whispergate, which, if you're not familiar with that, was a pretty bad and dangerous malware attack on Ukrainian government sites that basically overwrote the boot directory. And so if you were to see that attack going on in your network and you think that it's ransomware because it's overriding your file system, then maybe you're going to start shutting systems down. Well, because your boot directory, which loads the operating system for your computer, has been overwritten, it can't load your operating system. So whenever you try to restart your computer, it's bricked. It's not going to start up. It's not going to do anything. It's basically dead. So that attack was basically there to destroy systems. That is a bad cybersecurity attack. That's something that we definitely have talked about a little bit, but certainly could use a little bit more scrutiny just as far as what threat actors are capable of doing. However, if we're looking just at the website defacement or just at this denial of service attack, they're not even comparable to one another. These are very low level. They're just instantaneous, very temporary attacks that really, aren't that big of a deal, especially in light of the Whispergate attack, which certainly proved that it is a big deal. For now, we do not have any reason to believe that the denial of service service attack. It was like the website defacement, and that this is a feint for some other kind of cyber attack. We will continue to monitor though and check and see what other news comes out on this issue. One issue that I did notice was the number of folks that were reporting on this issue and either misreporting or overhyping this issue. Now, as far as us cybersecurity nerds are concerned, something like this is really not that big of a deal. So there is some reason to kind of calm down fears. It's, this isn't Whispergate. It's literally just a denial of service attack. And once it's over, it's over. However, something that we tend to miss is the context around these kinds of events. And that's really where a lot of that misreporting or overhyping comes in. A lot of people that don't understand what a denial of service attack is, or just how low level it is and not that significant they are, tend to see an incident like this, and then given the context around Ukraine and the tensions with Russia, freak out and think that this is something significant and it's all about to fall apart. And then of course you have a bunch of cybersecurity professionals that see that level of misreporting, and it's almost out of left field, especially if you're not familiar with the context around Ukraine. It almost seems like manufactured hype or fear around this issue, when a lot of the time it's just the author not really understanding what's going on and just trying to report on something, and their emotion gets through in a way that you would kind of hope is not being invoked in the reporting. Part of that context, and this is something that we as cybersecurity professionals actually can walk away with, is the idea of what hybrid warfare is and how that weaves into threat actors based out of Russia. We can actually take a deep dive into this on this channel if that's something that interests you, so let me know in the comments if it does. But at a very big picture, broad scope, wide swath, I guess whatever way you want to describe it, hybrid warfare is basically a framework around warfare that is kind of counter to our Western interpretation of what warfare is. To us, it's pretty binary. You're either at war or you're not at war. And a war is really any time that there are soldiers fighting each other. That's what war is to us. But if you were to contrast that with let's say the Russian general staff's understanding of what war is, it's more of a spectrum. And that takes us to hybrid warfare, which is kind of like a whole of government approach to warfare. It not only weaves in the traditional military side of warfare, but it also weaves in information warfare and cyber warfare and space and all the other domains of warfare that people in the military might understand, but people on the civilian side may not understand. And that people on both sides may not recognize can exist both in peacetime for us and wartime. So understanding that cyber attacks and what the actions that happen in cyberspace, especially around Ukraine, since this is involving Russia, these are really things that are just a fraction of the actual picture of what's going on in this environment. So it's important for us whenever we're seeing these kinds of cyber attacks happen to be able to understand the context around it and to really try to report as effectively as possible, to not overhype and continue the panic, since that's kind of the goal right now, and instead to really just report pretty plainly what's going on, to be able to understand, when something is a big deal like Whispergate and when something is not a big deal like a website defacement. In either case, it's a completely different animal whenever you compare this with a group like Darkseid, which is almost entirely motivated by money, and all their actions will happen in cyberspace. So that is the entire world of Darkseid. But let's say for a threat actor that belongs to the GRU, cyber is really just a fraction of the actual space that they are interested in. Today, Ukraine is still continuing the work to harden itself on a defense against any kind of Russian invasion. And part of that includes implementing a cybersecurity agreement made with the United States and NATO earlier this year. And that was actually part of how Ukraine was able to respond to this most recent denial of service attack. Obviously, we're going to keep our eyes on this space as well, so definitely stay tuned. And in the meantime, we've talked about a lot, and I've put everything relating to Ukraine, everything that's related to all these events in this playlist. So if you need to catch up, check this playlist out. And if you are interested in more news that's coming out in this space, then stay tuned on that playlist, and I'll be sure to link it to that playlist. In either case, hit that like button. I'll see you all next time. Bye.